Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Dan. This morning I have with me Mr. Janaprit Fernando, attorney at law. He is the Deputy Chief Commissioner of Sri Lanka Scouts and the member of the World Scouts Committee, having been elected as the first Sri Lankan in its 105-year history. Today we are going to talk about the national services rendered by the Scouts in Sri Lanka. Good morning and welcome, Janaprit.
Good morning, Dan.
Let us first of all talk about how the Scout movement started.
Dan, in 1907, Lord Baden-Powell, who was a retired army officer, thought it fit to take 20 boys out on camping and then had a trial camp in Brownsea Island. This camp was mainly for children between the ages of 12 to 15 and it proved to be a tremendous success. Thereafter, Lord Baden-Powell started these community troops in various churches and various community centers, and then it spread in the UK and spread to many other countries. The movement, which started in 1907 with 20 boys, today has spread over 215 countries and territories, and we have a membership of almost 52 million. And from 1907 up to now, we are very proud to state that over 500 million have gone through the Scout movement and become better citizens to face the world.
Yes, with such a start and now expanded into a huge community, what impact did it have?
Well, a movement to have started with 20 scouts and over a period of 110 years to spread to over 50 million itself is a big credential, because any movement which will not be satisfying or which will not be accepted to society will die. But this movement has grown because Lord Baden-Powell was a retired army officer who had won several wars during the Second World War and the First World War and before that. And then what happened was that Lord Baden-Powell thought it fit that children who are just wasting their time, spending their time, should be put together as teams and then as patrols and then do the work. And Lord Baden-Powell, what he did was he started this movement on a petrol system. Now today, if you take down, so many companies are spending millions of rupees and taking their staff on outward bound training. This is exactly what Lord Baden-Powell did 110 years ago. He got the children to get into groups of 8 to 9, known as a patrol, appointed a patrol leader, and under the patrol leader, they did so many different activities. And it was more a team building activities plus activities where the child could get self-confidence. Now, if you take any other movement, that movement will be focused on one particular area. If you take a first aid association or society, they'll teach first aid. If you take some other environment society, they'll be teaching on environment and environment protection. If you take a home science society, they'll be teaching on cooking. But in scouting, we give the children an all-round training, whether it's outdoor, indoor, and then even to iron your own clothes, to stitch a button, to cook your meals, to make a cup of tea. All that training is given from the age of about 8 to 9 years. And then these scouts are able to face any challenge. And the more important thing is that they work under one of their own leaders. Of course, there is an adult leader who guides them, but nevertheless, there is a child leader who among them is the patrol leader. And this patrol leader is the person who does all the necessary planning with the scouts and then to overcome whatever challenge. For instance, we take the boys to a stream and tell them to cross it. There is no bridge or there is no other facility. So the boys had to implement, the boys had to think out of the box and then prepare a way of getting across to the other side of the stream. So that is what scouting has done, and that is why scouting has spread to so many countries. In fact, there are so many countries which are doing scouting, in, as I said, 215 countries, but in the World Organization Scout Movement, we have 169 member organizations, which are known as National Scout Organizations. To become a member of the World Organization, there are certain criteria. One is duty to God. Then you must have a democratic system of government in your country. That type of criteria has to be there. And based on that only, the world organization will accept any country. That's the reason we have only 169 countries which are registered members, known as NSOs or National Scout Organizations, but there are over 250 countries which have scouting going on.
Sri Lanka in particular, we know that the Scouts movement is spread among the colleges, and in school level, the children, students, like you said, at the age of 8-9 years, they start scouting, or even before they start scouting. So with the Baden-Powell's initiative, what did the founder of scouting expect of the movement?
The founder of scouting expected the idling youth, adolescents and children to put their time, which they would have normally wasted doing nothing, something which is not useful, to become better citizens and to use that time for a better purpose. And the important thing in Sri Lanka is that we have school-based scouting. But Lord Baden-Powell, when he started scouting, as I said before, started in communities. Because in England, mostly the communities were church-based. And most of the groups in England were church-based. Then in addition to that, today you have Rotary groups, Lions groups and various other organizations which are sponsoring scout groups. If you take the world, majority of the scout groups are community-based scouting. That is affiliated to Rotary clubs and churches and temples, mosques, various organizations. But in our Asia-Pacific region, Asia and very especially Sri Lanka, India, countries like that, scouting is based in schools. Because our system has been that we are a 95% school-based scout organization. So we depend mainly on the Ministry of Education and our teachers. And the biggest challenge we have done today is that we are unable to find sufficient number of teachers to do scouting. Because as you know, there are several challenges teachers face, very especially economic challenges. So they prefer, rather than doing scouting and other extracurricular activities, to maybe indulge themselves and do some private tuition or do some other activity or spend time with their own children. So that is the biggest challenge we have. In fact, His Excellency the President, the Prime Minister and the Minister of Education, have all assured that they will give some kind of incentive, some kind of support to ensure that we have more teachers, because today the student population in Sri Lanka is, the eligible population for scouting is about 4 million. So when you take the Sri Lanka Girl Guides and the Sri Lanka Boy Scouts, Sri Lanka Scout Association, together we account only for about 120,000 students. So therefore there is a 3 million plus students who are unable to join the movement. Of course, maybe all don't want to join, but there'll be at least a good 25% from that who want to join. The parents want to send them, but unfortunately their schools don't have scout groups. So that is the biggest challenge we have in Sri Lanka at present.
Now, I understand that these boys and girls have a very good future when they are engaged in scouting activities. But you also talked about the shortcomings that the system has. What sort of action plan do you have to overcome this?
Actually, the scout movement has come to the conclusion that the world needs more scouts. That's why the scout movement has thought it fit, the World Scout movement, that in 2023, the world needs a minimum of 100 million scouts. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, we have come to the conclusion that Sri Lanka needs at least 100,000 scouts by 2023. Because as you know, scouts have never been involved in any antisocial activities in the past. There is no record of any kind of insurgency activity, terrorist activity where scouts have been involved. Which means scouting has given the right foundation to the younger society. Therefore, it is our aim to work with the Ministry of Education and the government of Sri Lanka to make sure that scouting is spread to all schools. There are almost 10,000 schools in this country, and most of the provincial councils and the Education Ministry are now working towards that. And our expectation is that we can work through these schools to have more scouts. Then you may know that about 7 years ago we started scouting for girls as well. So there we have about 20% of girls in our movement, and especially in mixed schools where there is no guiding, we start scout groups, because we do not want to start scout groups where there is girl guiding, because it's almost the same thing we do, and we don't want to unnecessarily break the movement. So therefore what we are advocating is to start more scout groups in schools where there are no scout groups, whether it's girls and boys, and then work with the Sri Lanka Girl Guides in order to ensure that the more percentages of our student population have the opportunity of becoming scouts.
As a matter of clarification, what is the difference between the Scouts movement and the Girl Guides movement? Is there any interrelationship?
Yeah, there's interrelationship because Lord Baden-Powell started scouting in 1907, and when at a scout rally, an international scout rally, suddenly he saw some girls coming and joining and saying they are Girl Guides, and then he was thinking what he could do with the guides. Then in 1909, he got his sister Agnes Baden-Powell to start a movement known as the Girl Guides. By 1910, the Girl Guide movement actually started in the world under Baden-Powell's sister Agnes, and then thereafter they also have been growing as much as the Scouts, and then they are also spread in almost 200 countries at present. The biggest difference in the Girl Guides and Scouts is the Scouting is a co-educational movement and the Girl Guides are an advocacy movement. In Scouting there is much more outdoor activity and petrol activity and various things like that, whereas Girl Guides are more advocacy, and of course both are involved in character building and making children and youth who are able to manage their affairs by themselves, be self-sufficient and change the world. And then also we have now started scouting in the prisons. We have for the prisoners between the ages of 18 to 26, known as Prison Rover Scouts. Then we have started scouting together with the Sri Lanka Air Force, the Sri Lankan Navy, known as Air Scouts and Sea Scouts. And we are looking at diversifying. The next sector should be the plantations. We have worked in the past, but due to various economic reasons, the plantation sector has not picked up. But we have to give some attention to that as well, because these are the areas of society which need scouting, because we ensure that children are properly guided for the future, so that Sri Lanka will be able to have a better country for its future citizens.
Now we know that there is an annual event in Sri Lanka called the Scouts Jamboree, and also in the world they do have this Jamboree every year. Talking about this event, do you expect all the scouts to take part in these events? And in Sri Lanka the parents are quite careful about their children, whether it's a boy or a girl, to send them for this Jamboree and spend few days there. How do you think about this?
Dan, actually the Jamborees are held once in 4 years. The World Jamborees, the last World Jamboree was held in Japan in 2015, and the next World Jamboree will be in the United States in 2019. This is one of the largest events of the world because we have almost 40,000 scouts from all over the world taking part. It's about 30,000 scouts and about 10,000 staff. What happens, Dan, is that in the World Jamboree, so many countries camp under tent, and then they're able to meet so many different societies, so cultures, races, religions, all stay under one roof without any kind of problem. Even though there were wars between various countries during the World Jamboree, those two countries used to camp together, so there was no issue. So by that, the biggest message we can give through a Jamboree is that world peace can be advocated through this type of activity. In Sri Lanka also we have Jamborees only once in 4 years, which are known as national Jamborees. In addition to that, various districts have their district camps, especially the Colombo camp is known as the Camporee, which is held at the Viharamadevi Park. And unfortunately, in the past few years, the Viharamadevi Park has not been given for this camp after the development of the park. But however, the Colombo district has their camp either in some school or in a camping site somewhere else. So by this, what we expect these boys to get is the experience of camping, the experience of mingling around with children from other schools. You get the most elite schools, you get the poorest of the poor schools, all camping together, and they don't know from which school or which area the boy is from, but they all camp as brothers and sisters. And as far as parents are concerned, they should not have any fear or any worry, because every unit, every school unit or every scout group is under a adult leader, or 1, 2 or 3 adult leaders, and then they are under good care because there is so much of discipline in the campsites. The boys cannot leave the campsite. Visitors cannot enter camps after certain times and before certain times. So there are so many different precautions taken, especially if it's a world event, World Jamboree. You have to in fact register at least 1 week before even to visit that Jamboree, because that is how far they go with security. Because when you are dealing with children of other parents, we are extra cautious. In fact, today, this morning, my son and them went on their school camp. They'll be in camp until Sunday. So in addition to these jamborees, camporees, national jamborees, units have their own camps as well. So camping is one of the biggest and most important things in scouting, is because that is there we can give the full training. Where the boys have to cook themselves, boys have to camp under tent, they have to wash their clothes, they have to do the activities. Then they spend the 4 or 5 days or even 7, 8 days with their brother scouts and brother scouts and sister scouts, and then gain the experience which they are supposed to get from the movement.
When we talk about the national service rendered by the Scouts movement, we understand that the Scouts get involved in disaster management situations in Sri Lanka and also in other related times of emergency. So how is the movement administered at present?
Yeah, we administer Sri Lanka Scout Association from our headquarters in Colombo 2. We have the Chief Commissioner, who is the Chief Executive, and I'm the Deputy, as you mentioned before. In addition, we have the Sri Lanka Scout Council, which has a president and then the executive committee of the council. They are the ones who take decisions on behalf of the movement, and the Chief Commissioner and other commissioners, we carry out the decisions taken by them in the best interest of the scouts around the country. As far as disaster management is concerned, the best example is the tsunami. The tsunami in Sri Lanka, immediately the day after the tsunami, the scouts, we went down south. Actually, there were no roads to go. We had to clear the roads, go down south. And we realized that the biggest challenge people had was they were housed in various temples, schools and places, but they had no toilets. So we immediately got into the constructing toilets for these refugee camps. And within a matter of 3 weeks, almost, we built about over 300 toilets, because we had the know-how. When we go on camps and jamborees, we put up our temporary toilets, and we were able to put up these toilets and give that facility. In addition to that, when of course the tsunami got a lot of response from so many countries, and our sister and brother nations from around the world, knowing what we were doing, started sending us funds, and we were able to even build some houses. Then most recent this year, when there was a flood in the Ratnapura and the southern Sabaragaon province and the southern province, our Secretary General himself immediately contacted me and then wanted to know what service has to be done. And they sent us sort of money, and we were able to immediately act upon it, visit refugee camps, and then work with scouts from Malaysia, and then carry out health camps and do lots of service. So we as scouts, even sometimes we are in uniform, but sometimes we are not in uniform. But what we do is immediately we are trained in our own way to immediately respond to any natural disaster or any disaster situation in the country, and our scouts get mobilized automatically, and we have been doing that in the past, and we hope to continue that in the future. But of course we hope that there won't be disasters in the country, because disaster is not a good thing for any country. But nevertheless, we are scouts, and we are prepared at any time to support anyone.
Janaprit, you have been elected as the first Sri Lankan in the 105-year history of scouting in Sri Lanka, as I mentioned before. What does it feel to be a member out of the 12 elected from 169 countries?
Dan, the biggest challenge was to say who I was one thing, but to market our country. Because most of the countries in the African region, Southern American, even Europe, did not know where Sri Lanka was. They have heard of Sri Lanka, but they did not even know. So we had to, while promoting myself as a candidate, I had to promote Sri Lanka as well. And I'm very happy to note that we are able to promote Sri Lanka. And each time a decision is taken on behalf of the 52 million scouts around 200 countries, you can rest assured that the Sri Lankan also is sitting there and taking the decision. And each time the World Committee meets and we visit a country or take some decision or take part in activity, when I'm introduced, I'll be introduced as Sri Lankan, which means the Sri Lanka will be on the map, on the world map, very especially in the countries where it's not known. And we will be able to promote Sri Lanka, not only promote Sri Lanka, but we'll be able to do exchange programs with other countries, get overseas friends and instructors, leaders to come over here, train our people, send our scouts and leaders abroad, have exchange programs. And this will give a lot of exposure to the Sri Lanka Scouts. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, in the 105 year history, I'm very happy that I was been able to get elected. But I take it not as feather in the cap, but as another opportunity to serve my community, serve the world, and serve scouting around the world.
Yes, finally, what is the message you want to share with your fellow Sri Lankans?
My dear fellow Sri Lankans, Sri Lankan parents especially, please don't deprive your son, your daughter of joining the scout movement, because there is no other movement in the world which can be equivalent to the scout movement, because your son, your daughter can get the best training. Please don't think that academic qualification is the important thing. Scouts are also doing very well in their studies. In fact, the number one student in scholarship last year was a scout. And the training, the all-round training they get from scouting, the facilities they get from scouting, and the know-how, and very especially the fact that they are able to work as a team is the most important thing for a Sri Lankan. And we, in our own way, in May 2017, one example is that we said no to plastic and polythene. We had a summit and said no to plastic and polythene. All the scouts went back to their schools and started implementing that. Today I'm very happy that the government of Sri Lanka has realized the ill effects of plastic and polythene and banned it. And these are some of the initiatives we take. So your son, your daughter can be a part of these initiatives. Make sure if your son's school doesn't have a troop, there are open scout groups. Talk to us and we will be able to help you to make your son or daughter a scout who could be a better citizen, to create a better Sri Lanka and create a better world.
Well, in today's Coffee with Dan, I was joined by Mr. Janaprit Fernando, Attorney at Law, who is the Deputy Chief Commissioner of Sri Lanka Scouts and a member of the World Scouts Committee, having been elected as the first Sri Lankan in its 105-year history. We were talking about the national services rendered by the Scouts in Sri Lanka. And thank you very much, Janaprit, for being here in Coffee with Dan.
You're most welcome, Dan, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity of being able to address my fellow citizens.
And we will join again on next Monday with another Coffee with Dan.